The needle was thinner than a strand of silk, and it trembled. Not from her hands. Elira's hands never trembled. It trembled because Elder Kael was breathing too fast, his chest rising and falling in shallow rhythms that sent the slightest vibration up through the extraction filament and into the housing unit. She had placed a steadying cuff on his forearm and told him twice to breathe slowly. He was trying. She could see him trying. "Look at the horizon," she said. Her voice came out measured, the way she had trained it to. Past the glass. The sanctum's outer wall was a single curved pane of crystal, floor to ceiling, and beyond it the sky of upper lumen was doing what it did only at this hour, burning. The stratosphere deepened through shades of amber and rose before surrendering at the far edge to the permanent violet wash that gave lumen its name. Below the island's rim, other archipelago fragments drifted in loose formation, their undersides trailing bioluminescent moss that caught the last of the light and held it, glowing green gold against the gathering dark. Kael found the horizon. His breathing slowed. "There," Elira said. She pressed the secondary actuator and the filament completed its circuit. On the monitoring screen to her left, a waveform bloomed, irregular at first, then settling into the long, rolling peaks that indicated a coherent memory forming. She watched it the way a watchmaker watches a mechanism assemble itself, tracking each component for flaw or fracture. The old man's eyes were open and very far away. He was 86 years old. She had read his intake form twice, not because she forgot, but because she liked to hold the facts precisely. Kael Orvanen, born on the island of Maravast, relocated to Kaelora following the tide collapse of 2117. Former archivist, no living family. His body was failing in the gradual, dignified way of old bodies, but his mind was still exact, still full. He had come to her not because he feared death, but because he feared loss. He wanted his memories preserved before the flesh that housed them gave out. This was the most common reason they came. The waveform sharpened. On the secondary screen, the pre-crystal matrix began to collect the distilled resonance, building its structure lattice by lattice. The color started as a pale blush, the faint pink of something new and uncertain, and then it deepened. Violet flooded in. Not the violet of the sky, but something interior, warmer. The color of a feeling. Elira leaned in fractionally. "Are you with a person?" she asked. She kept her tone neutral. Clinical. The question mattered for calibration, not curiosity. "Yes," Kael said. The word came out strange, softened. She was standing by the water, on Mirvast, the old dock before they levitated the island, when you could still touch the sea. He paused. Her hair was wet. "Good. Hold it there." She adjusted the resonance filter, reducing the ambient noise in the extraction field. The violet deepened still, reaching toward the blue edge of the spectrum, and then it pulled back and settled, richly, completely violet, with a warm pulse at its center like a heartbeat. She had extracted hundreds of memories, thousands, counting the early years of her residency in the Mnemosyne Research Division, when she had processed grief catalogs and archival deposits for the council. She knew the color systems the way a sommelier knows a wine by its color in the glass. Red-orange for rage, blue-white for grief pure and cold, yellow for wonder, the bright, uncomplicated kind that children produced and old people only rarely recovered. And violet. Always violet. For love in its early hours, when it was still bewildering and new. She had not produced a violet crystal in years. The extraction completed with a small, precise tone from the housing unit, and Elira withdrew the filament with practiced care, rolling it back onto its spool without looking, her eyes still on the developing crystal. It was roughly the size of her thumbnail. She lifted it with insulated tongs and held it to the light. Beautiful, she thought, and then set the thought aside, because it wasn't useful. Kael exhaled fully for the first time since she'd begun. He turned his head toward her, away from the horizon, and his eyes came back from wherever they had been. "Did it work?" he asked. "Yes." She placed the crystal in its preservation sleeve and sealed the edge with 2 passes of the thermal stylus. "You'll feel some dissonance for the next day or so. The memory will still be accessible to you, but it may feel slightly flattened. A copy effect. It will restore itself in 48 hours.
"I know, you explained. There was no impatience in it. He was simply noting the fact. I did." She stripped her gloves off and set them on the instrument tray. "You can sit up when you're ready. There's no rush." Kael sat up slowly, the articulated examination chair adjusting to follow him. He looked out the window. The violet in the sky had deepened, and the first bioluminescent blooms were beginning to open along the underside of the adjacent island fragment, their petals unfurling like slow fireworks made of pale blue light. "My wife," he said. Elira paused with her gloves in her hand. She didn't mean to be speaking out loud, but it was the most terrifying thing she'd ever done. "And you know I'm not a doctor. I never even tried to finish high school. I just... well, just a little while." She was 23. I was 22. We'd both been assigned to the Marivast survey team, cataloging the old shore structures before the levitation conversion. He said it quietly, not for her benefit particularly. More the way a man talks when he finds himself with an audience that won't interrupt. I'd seen her for weeks on the team. We ate at the same long tables in the survey tent. I knew her name. But that day by the water, she turned and looked at me, and I realized I hadn't seen her at all. I'd been looking at her and not seeing her. He shook his head. You don't get many moments like that. When the world adjusts. "No," Elira said. "You don't." She set the preservation sleeve in its transport case and closed the clasp. The small click sounded very final. "How long have you been doing this?" Kael asked. He was looking at her now, not the sky. 17 years. "Do you ever look at them? The crystals? After?" The question was simple, and it dropped into her like a stone into water, sending rings outward that she didn't let show on her face. She picked up the transport case. "I review them for calibration quality, to ensure the resonance held." "That's not what I asked." She met his eyes. They were gray and sharp and without any cruelty, which made them harder to deflect. She had the thought that he had probably been a very good archivist. "No," she said. "I don't." He nodded, as if that confirmed something he'd suspected. He reached for his jacket, folded neatly on the side table, and drew it over his shoulders. "Do you ever wish you could keep one?" he asked. The violet crystal in its sleeve caught the last of the sunset coming through the curved wall, and for a moment the light went through it and split into something richer, warmer. A memory of warmth. The ghost of a woman on a dock, her hair wet, turning toward a young man who had not yet understood what he was looking at. Elira looked at the crystal for just a moment too long. "The crystals belong to their sources," she said. "That's the law." Kael smiled. Small and knowing. "That's also not what I asked." She walked him to the outer door of the sanctum, a long room lined on both sides with sealed preservation cases, each one holding its private universe, each one cataloged and dated and cross-referenced with the scrupulous attention she brought to everything, except perhaps herself. The cases gave off a faint combined glow in the low light, blue-white, the cold storage default. Walking through here always reminded her of walking through ice. She opened the door for him. The corridor beyond was warm and smelled of recycled air and the mineral tang unique to Kaelora stone. "Your extraction data will be filed with the Mnemosyne archive by morning," she said.
You'll receive a receipt and a preservation certificate within 3 days. If you have questions about access or transfer protocols, the secondary office on the second level handles those.
Thank you, Dr. Voss. Of course. He paused in the doorway, his back to her, looking down the corridor. I hope you have something worth keeping, he said. Whatever it is. He walked away. She watched him go for 3 seconds. Then closed the door.
Alone, she crossed back through the row of glowing cases without looking at them. She set the transport case on her main workstation and opened it, holding the violet crystal up one final time in the blue-white light of her lab. The warmth inside it beat like something alive. She tilted it. At a certain angle, the violet shifted, went almost gold for a fraction of a second before returning. She frowned. She hadn't adjusted for any gold spectrum content during the extraction. A violet reading this clean should not carry gold undertones. Gold was the signature of a child's perception, or of memory that had been touched by another mind, layered like paint. She set the crystal under the analysis aperture and brought up the spectral scan. The readout populated in lines across her screen, and she tracked each one with her eyes, looking for the bleed point. There, a faint thread. Not from Kael, running orthogonally through his memory's waveform like a seam in wood.
She stared at it. An extraneous resonance, something that had been present in her extraction field without her knowledge. Either it had contaminated the process from outside, or it had been dormant in the crystal matrix already and activated on contact with Kael's memory, the way a second voice activates when a chord is struck. She could think of no mechanism for the second explanation. She opened her field log for the session. All parameters had read normal. Sanctum seals were intact. She was the only registered pneumoniologist on Kaelora with an active extraction license. There was no one else on this floor. She ran the spectral scan again. The thread was still there, patient and gold. She sat with it for a long time, the bioluminescent blooms brightening beyond the glass as the dark fully arrived, and the sky of lumen went from violet to deep and starred, and the islands drifted in their slow, cold ballet far below. The thread pulsed, just barely, as if it were breathing,